Imagine being the most powerful military force on Earth. You have jets, you have bombs, you have helicopters, artillery, chemical weapons, and the most advanced technology the 1960s could produce. You have 500,000 soldiers on the ground. You have nearly unlimited funding from the wealthiest nation in human history. And yet, you cannot find your enemy. They vanish. Right in front of you. They strike at night, disappear before dawn, and when you search the jungle, there is nothing. No camp, no base, no trace. Just silence, and the echo of what just happened. This is not fiction. This is not a movie. This happened. And the people who did it were not superheroes with advanced technology. They were farmers, guerrilla fighters, and ordinary men and women with shovels, bare hands, and an idea so simple that the most powerful military in the world could not stop it. They went underground. What follows is the real story of the Cu Chi tunnels. A network so vast, so ingenious, and so brutal that it became one of the most remarkable military achievements in modern history. And the story of how a tunnel system dug into red clay earth in southern Vietnam helped change the outcome of an entire war. It is the spring of 1966. A unit of U.S. Army soldiers is on patrol through the jungle northwest of Saigon, in a region called Cu Chi. The area has been a problem for months. American patrols keep getting ambushed in locations that should be safe. Viet Cong fighters keep appearing, attacking, and then disappearing without a trace. Intelligence reports suggest there is a base somewhere nearby, but every search comes up empty. Then something strange happens. One of the soldiers notices a faint column of smoke rising from the jungle floor. Not from a fire, not from a campsite, from the ground itself. He walks toward it, crouches down, pushes aside some leaves, and finds a small wooden trapdoor, barely the size of a manhole cover, camouflaged so perfectly that you could walk over it 100 times and never notice it. He lifts the door, looks down into the darkness, and realizes that the enemy has been there the entire time. Not around them, not behind them, but beneath their feet. What he had just discovered was the entrance to a tunnel system that stretched for over 250 kilometers through the earth. A tunnel system that had taken nearly 20 years to build. And a tunnel system that would help defeat the most powerful military force the world had ever seen. But to understand how any of this was possible, we have to go back, way back, to a time before the Americans even arrived. The story of the Cu Chi tunnels does not begin in the 1960s. It begins in the 1940s. Vietnam in the 1940s is a country under colonial rule. For nearly a century, France has controlled the region, extracting its resources and suppressing its people. But now a new force has emerged. The Viet Minh, a revolutionary movement led by Ho Chi Minh, is fighting for Vietnamese independence. And in Cu Chi, a province 60 kilometers northwest of Saigon, local resistance fighters begin digging. At first, the tunnels are simple. Narrow passages, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, used to hide fighters and weapons from French patrols. They are not sophisticated, they are not elaborate, they are just holes in the earth. But they work. They work remarkably well. The French cannot find the fighters disappear. The tunnels grow. By the time France withdraws from Vietnam in 1954, following their defeat at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, the tunnel network in Cu Chi already stretches for dozens of kilometers. Local fighters know every passage. They know where it floods. They know which sections collapse under pressure. They know where the air pockets are and where it becomes suffocating. This is their territory, and they know it better than any map could ever show. Then, the Americans arrive. The United States becomes increasingly involved in Vietnam throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s, supporting the South Vietnamese government against the Communist North. By 1965, President Lyndon Johnson has committed hundreds of thousands of American troops to a full-scale military intervention. The goal is straightforward: stop the spread of communism, crush the Viet Cong, win the war. The Americans bring everything with them: the B-52 bombers, the napalm, the Agent Orange, the helicopters that can be heard from miles away. The firepower is extraordinary. By any conventional military analysis, the Viet Cong should be crushed within months. But something is wrong. The Viet Cong are not fighting a conventional war. They are not lining up in open fields. They are not defending fixed positions. They are everywhere and nowhere. They attack and they vanish. They plant bombs, set ambushes, and disappear into the jungle. And then they disappear even further into the earth itself. The Cu Chi tunnels by 1965 are no longer simple holes. They have become something extraordinary. Picture a city, not on the surface of the earth, but beneath it. The Cu Chi tunnel network by the mid-1960s is a fully functional underground civilization. There are hospitals carved into the earth, with operating tables and medical equipment smuggled through jungle supply lines. There are kitchens designed with special ventilation systems so that cooking smoke disperses through the jungle canopy rather than rising in a visible column. There are armories where fighters manufacture their own weapons and ammunition. There are meeting rooms, dormitories, and command centers. There are wells for fresh water. There are even theaters where fighters would gather underground to watch films and hear political speeches to maintain morale. None of it is visible from the surface. The tunnels run on 3 levels. The top level is the shallowest, just a few meters below the surface, used for movement and supply. The middle level is deeper, more protected, used for living quarters and storage. The third level, the deepest, can be 12 meters or more below the surface, where important leaders shelter during the heaviest bombing campaigns. Between the levels are trapdoors and booby traps. Every section of tunnel is designed to be isolated. If one section is discovered and flooded or gassed, the fighters can seal it off and survive in another section. The system is not just a tunnel, it is a living organism that can adapt, regenerate, and survive almost any attack. And the Americans are about to learn this the hard way. In January 1966, the United States launches Operation Crimp, one of the largest ground operations of the entire war. 8,000 troops descend on the Cu Chi district. Tanks roll through the jungle. Helicopters sweep the area. The objective is simple: find and destroy the Viet Cong base that intelligence reports suggest is somewhere in this region. For 3 weeks, 8,000 soldiers search. They find almost nothing. A few small tunnel entrances, some weapons caches. But the headquarters they are looking for does not seem to exist. The Viet Cong fighters seem to evaporate. And at night, from within the very earth the American soldiers are sleeping on, Viet Cong fighters slip out of their tunnels and attack the U.S. base camp, then disappear again. The frustration is almost impossible to describe. One U.S. Army general later wrote that fighting in Cu Chi was like fighting a ghost. You could destroy everything you could see, and it made no difference, because the real war was happening somewhere you could not see. Operation Crimp does produce one critical discovery, however. The soldiers realize the tunnels are far larger than anyone imagined, and someone is going to have to go inside them. This is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. The U.S. military creates a special unit. They call them the Tunnel Rats. These are volunteer soldiers, typically small in stature because the tunnels are barely wide enough for a human body, who go down into the darkness armed with only a pistol, a flashlight, and a knife. No radio, no backup, no way out except forward or backward. Think about what that means for a moment. You lower yourself into a hole in the ground in the middle of a war zone. The hole is so narrow that your shoulders nearly touch both sides. You have to crawl. You cannot stand, cannot turn around easily, and cannot call for help. The darkness is total, and somewhere in that darkness, there may be enemy fighters, or booby traps, or a trap door above a spike pit, or a wire connected to a grenade, or a snake deliberately placed to protect the passage. The psychological pressure is unlike almost anything else in warfare. Multiple tunnel rats suffered complete psychological breakdowns simply from entering the tunnels, without encountering any danger at all. The claustrophobia, the darkness, the certainty that something terrible could be waiting just inches ahead was enough to break men who had proven their courage in open battle. Those who could endure it became among the most decorated soldiers of the Vietnam War. But even the bravest and most skilled tunnel rats could not solve the fundamental problem. The tunnel network was simply too vast. For every passage they explored, there were 100 more. For every booby trap they found, there were a dozen they did not. And the Viet Cong knew their own tunnels with a familiarity that no American soldier could ever match. The tunnel rats could explore, they could map, they could occasionally capture fighters or destroy small sections, but they could not destroy the system, and the system was what mattered. By 1967, the Americans have shifted their strategy. If they cannot go underground, they will destroy everything above ground. The region around Cu Chi becomes one of the most heavily bombed areas in the history of warfare. B-52 bombers conduct what are called arc-light strikes, dropping hundreds of tons of bombs in patterns designed to saturate entire square kilometers of Earth. The goal is to collapse the tunnels from above by sheer explosive force. The bombs create craters, hundreds of craters, then thousands. The jungle is stripped away. The landscape looks like the surface of the moon. From the air, it is difficult to imagine that anything below the surface could survive. But the tunnels survive. The builders had anticipated this. The deepest levels are reinforced with timber and packed earth in ways that absorb explosive shock waves rather than collapsing under them. The tunnel entrances are designed to be expendable, easily replaced after bombing raids. And the Viet Cong fighters have learned to identify the distinctive sound of B-52s flying at high altitude and take shelter before the bombs arrive. The Americans then turn to chemical weapons. They pump tear gas into the tunnels. They try flooding sections with water. They experiment with smoke and fire. Special chemical compounds are developed specifically to clear tunnel systems. Some of these work in isolated cases, but the Viet Cong counter-adapt. They create better seals between tunnel sections. They develop filtration systems using wet cloth to reduce gas concentrations. They build drainage systems to handle flooding. Every time the Americans find a new method of attack, the defenders find a way to survive it. And here is the detail that investigators and military historians later found most remarkable. The Viet Cong fighters living in the tunnels were not elite special forces soldiers. Many were ordinary villagers who had chosen to fight. Women worked alongside men. Some of the most important tunnel builders and defenders were teenagers. They built this system, maintained it, fought from it, and survived in it, not because of advanced training or superior technology, but because this was their land, and they were willing to endure almost anything to keep it. The conditions inside the tunnels were close to unbearable. Imagine living underground for months at a time. The temperature is constant but stifling. The air is humid and thick. There are insects everywhere, some of them poisonous. The noise of bombing above is a constant presence, sometimes close enough to shake the walls and cause partial collapses. Food is limited to whatever can be smuggled through supply networks at night. The only light comes from small oil lamps that must be used sparingly to preserve fuel. People fell ill constantly. Malaria was widespread. Dysentery was almost universal. Skin infections from the constant dampness were unavoidable. People lost weight, lost strength, and lived in a state of physical deterioration that would have been disabling in any other circumstance. And yet they stayed. And they fought. When they emerged from the tunnels at night, they were extraordinarily effective soldiers. They knew the ground perfectly. They could move through the jungle silently. They knew where American patrols would be and when. They attacked with sudden, devastating violence and were gone before any response could be organized. The tunnels were not just a military tactic. They were a statement about what people are capable of when they are fighting for their homeland with nothing to lose and everything to gain. The turning point in the tunnel story, and arguably in the entire war, comes in January and February of 1968 with the Tet Offensive. For years, the American public has been told that the war is being won. Military briefings are optimistic, progress reports are positive. The enemy, the official narrative goes, is weakening. Then, on the night of January 31st, 1968, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces launched simultaneous attacks on more than 100 cities and towns across South Vietnam. They attack the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. They take over the ancient city of Hue. They strike military installations across the country, including in areas that were supposedly fully secure. The Cu Chi Tunnel Network is central to this operation. Fighters who have been living underground for months emerge coordinated and equipped to participate in attacks across the Saigon region. Weapons, ammunition, and supplies that have been moved through tunnel networks and hidden in jungle caches for months are now deployed all at once. The military results of the Tet Offensive are complicated. American and South Vietnamese forces eventually repel the attacks and retake lost territory. The Viet Cong suffer catastrophic losses. In purely military terms, the United States can claim a victory. But the psychological impact is devastating and irreversible. The American public has been told they are winning. The Tet Offensive shows them something very different. If the enemy can mount this scale of coordinated attack after years of the most intensive bombing campaign in history, something has gone deeply wrong. The credibility of the military and political leadership collapses. Protests across the United States grow from demonstrations into a mass movement. Public support for the war shatters. The tunnels had done something that no conventional military force could have accomplished. They had preserved the Viet Cong long enough to launch an attack that broke not the bodies of their enemy, but their will. The Cu Chi district, often called the Iron Triangle by American forces, is eventually declared a free fire zone. This means that anything that moves in the area can be killed. Almost the entire civilian population is forcibly relocated. Defoliation campaigns strip the jungle bare. The bombing continues. By some estimates, more bombs are dropped on the Cu Chi area than were dropped on all of Germany during the Second World War. The tunnels sustain damage. Sections collapse. Fighters die. The network shrinks and is repaired and shrinks again, but it is never destroyed. In 1975, when North Vietnamese forces finally take Saigon and the war ends, fighters emerge from the Cu Chi tunnels for the last time. Some of them have been underground or operating from those tunnels for nearly a decade. The Americans are gone, the war is over, and the tunnels are still there. What do we do with this story? Military historians have spent decades analyzing what happened in Cu Chi. There are lessons about asymmetric warfare, about the limits of technological superiority, and about the extraordinary effectiveness of guerrilla tactics combined with deep local knowledge of terrain. But there is something else in this story that goes beyond military analysis. The Cu Chi tunnels represent something about the human capacity for endurance that is genuinely difficult to comprehend from a distance. The people who built and maintained and lived in those tunnels were not given superhuman strength or invulnerability. They suffered. They were sick, hungry, frightened, and exhausted. Many of them died, either from bombing, from combat, or from the grinding attrition of living underground in impossible conditions. They endured it anyway. Today, part of the Cu Chi tunnel network is a museum. Tourists travel from around the world to walk through passages that have been widened slightly for their comfort, to see recreations of underground kitchens and meeting rooms, and to understand in some small way what happened there. The tunnels that once represented the most dangerous terrain in a brutal war are now a place where children pose for photographs. But the original passages are still there, narrower than you can imagine, darker than the artificial lighting suggests, and running deeper into the earth than any casual visitor ever sees. In those original passages, the story is preserved in the earth itself. The clay walls are still marked by the hands that shaped them. The floor is still worn smooth by the bodies that crawled across it. The ventilation holes are still oriented exactly as some unknown engineer planned them, to carry smoke away from the surface without revealing what lay below. Nobody asked the people who built this system whether they thought it would work. They simply built it, maintained it, fought from it, survived in it, and eventually watched the most powerful military force in the world pack up and leave. The Cu Chi tunnels did not win the Vietnam War alone. History is never that simple. Politics, diplomacy, domestic pressure, strategic mistakes, and countless human decisions all played their roles. But the tunnels made something possible that would have been impossible otherwise. They allowed a smaller force to survive long enough, hit hard enough, and endure long enough to outlast an enemy that had every material advantage imaginable. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is not the biggest bomb or the most advanced aircraft. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is the willingness to go underground, to endure the darkness, and to keep going no matter what falls on you from above. And sometimes the people who dig the holes change history.